apparently I'm heartless or soulless or whatever, this book hurts. I actually read screenplays where the descriptions are more descriptive than the descriptions in this book. Hey everyone, it's Olivia and welcome back to my channel. August was both a good and a bad reading month for me. Good in terms of quantity, bad in terms of quality. I read 6 books in August and that's a really impressive record for me. 6 books in 1 month. I don't think I've read that much before. However, I didn't really enjoy many of the books that I read, which was really disappointing. There were many books that I really wanted to like, but ended up not liking, and I was really sad about that. But I'm trying to stay positive about the fact that I did read 6 books, and 2 of those were like fairly thick books, so I would say it's really impressive and I'm quite proud of myself. So before we dive into all the books that I read in August, make sure that you like this video and that you are subscribed to my channel and click the bell icon to be notified when I upload, because I upload twice a week on Mondays and Fridays and you don't want to miss out. Alright, so let's just dive into all of the books that I read in August. So if you've been watching my videos for a while, then you would know that I have been binge reading the Shadowhunter Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, and I finally made it up to the point of her last complete series, which is the Dark Artifices series. I read Lady Midnight, which is the first book of the series, in July, and so in August I started off with reading Lord of Shadows, which is the sequel to Lady Midnight and the second book in the trilogy. So Lord of Shadows follows the first book, and the synopsis is going to contain spoilers for Lady Midnight, so if you haven't read that, I'll try to keep it as vague as possible. This book follows Emma Carstairs and her peripety Julian Blackthorn, who have realized their feelings for each other, but because it is forbidden for them to be in love, they are trying to avoid it as much as possible. Emma knows something about why it's forbidden, and she's doing everything she possibly can to make Julian fall out of love with her. Julian is just being really sad about it and trying his best to be a good sport about all of it. So they end up having to go to the Unseelie court to save their friend Kieran from being executed by the Unseelie king. The Seelie Queen kind of gets involved, and everybody wants the black volume of the dead, which had sunk in the ocean along with Malcolm in the first book. And so that's kind of the main plot of this book. I didn't love Lady Midnight, but I was really hoping that the series would get better as I read further on. Lots of people really loved Lord of Shadows. I was really excited to see where the story would go after Lady Midnight. This book also made a lot of people cry, so I was really interested to know what was going to happen. So I didn't like this book at all. I'm not going to say too much about how I feel because I'm planning to do a whole series of reviews for each book in the Dark Artifices series, but generally I didn't enjoy this book. I don't really understand what the hype around this book is, and I'm kind of really disappointed and sad about it. So I mentioned a lot of people cried reading this book. That's in relation to the ending, and if you read this book then you know what I'm talking about. Unfortunately for me, because apparently I'm heartless or soulless or whatever, it didn't really affect me that much. I totally saw it coming, and the way that it was written just didn't make me feel the way I think it was intended to make me feel, which was sad enough to cry, and I was just really disappointed with the way that it was executed. The ending, if you've read it, there are sort of 3 main events that happen consecutively in rapid succession, and it happens so quickly that there isn't time to really process or to really have any feelings about it. I just felt like, I get that the ending was supposed to be chaotic, but the way that it was written just felt like it was really rushed to get to the ending shock factor. This is a 700-page book, and if you were building up to that ending, you should have given us more at the end. And it's also really strange because Cassandra Clare has this habit of having really anticlimactic endings and then a lot of falling action. In this book there is 0 falling action. She ends it at the climax, and it's just kind of written in a way that's intended to shock you, that was written to end the book. I get why people would be frustrated and upset about it, but it made me frustrated and upset not because of what happened, but because of the way it was written. The whole peripety anti-forbidden love thing. Just, it wasn't really my thing. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy the way that it was written. It was really annoying and frustrating to me, and that's kind of a really big plot. And I didn't really like how there were so many, pun intended, mundane things that happen in this book. It's so long and it seems to really drag on. The pacing is really strange, which is one of the reasons why I just couldn't enjoy reading this book. There are a lot of things that happen in this book that are unnecessary. There are things that happen that try to be important, but they don't really have any major consequences to the actions or because of what happened. And I just thought it was a really weird way of trying to force certain people to be in proximity to each other or in a certain situation in order for them to face their feelings and stuff. And it just made me upset that there wasn't any real reason in terms of the plot for this situation to happen. There are various things that I could be talking about in this book that could apply to this very vague description, but I'm sure if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I didn't really enjoy this book. So naturally, the next book that I picked up was the final book of the Dark Artifices series, Queen of Air and Darkness. This book is a thick one. I can barely hold this with like one hand. It really, really hurts. Anyway, this book is like 900 pages, and I thought Lady Midnight and Lord of Shadows, which were about 700 pages each, were too long. This book is definitely way too long. You could easily cut like 200 pages out of this. It blows my mind, honestly. For a finale, I wanted to really enjoy this. Like, I didn't really like Lord of Shadows, but I thought maybe it had middle book syndrome for me or something. Like, Lady Midnight wasn't the best, it wasn't my favorite, but I would say that I enjoyed it enough. I was really hoping I would get that same kind of feeling with Queen of Air and Darkness. Surprise, surprise, I did not. Yeah, I don't know what it is about this series, but I don't. Actually, no, I do know what it is. There are many things I don't like about this series. I don't really understand the hype around it. Anyway, moving on. Queen of Air and Darkness follows Lord of Shadows. Essentially what happens in this book is that they have to travel to the Unseelie Court once again, but this time it's to retrieve the Black Volume of the Dead, which seems to just be like a constant thread throughout the series. There are so many things happening. Like, there is some kind of disease or illness that is attacking warlocks. There are these things called blights, which is essentially areas that have just lost all of its magic, and like runes don't work there, and it's just bleeding into their world, and they're trying to find a way to stop that, as well as a bunch of like Shadowhunter politics with Horace Dearborn, who is essentially like the Hitler of the Shadowhunter world. And then the Seelie Queen makes an appearance because the Unseelie King has something that she wants. A bunch of stuff happens, and they somehow end up in an alternate universe, which is kind of apocalyptic. Essentially, the Dark War ended with the good guys losing, and so a lot of people are dead. It's really dark. You can't use magic there. It's hopeless. That is like a huge chunk of the book, and then they come back, and then they just, you know, everything that's going on in this book kind of comes to this point near the end. Basically, like 800 pages of this book was just build up to this grand finale that didn't feel so grand at all. Again, I am going to do a review on this to talk about specifics because there is so much to talk about, but in one thing in particular that happened at the end, the whole forbidden love between Parabatai thing was so stupid, and the way that it was resolved was really annoying. And if you read this series without reading The Mortal Instruments or The Infernal Devices, then you wouldn't know, but she basically resolves this whole situation the same way she's done it before twice. So I just thought it was kind of ridiculous that she didn't have a different or a more clever way of trying to resolve this conflict. She basically had to use the same formula that she used in TMI and TID to resolve this as well, and I just found that really annoying and ridiculous. The other thing that I want to mention is that the whole alternate universe thing doesn't really play that huge of a role in this book alone, and in fact that whole section that takes place in that alternate universe really didn't need to be there, and then it kind of tied in to the epilogue. Instead of it tying up all loose ends and making it a happy ending, like it already had the happy ending, but instead of that, the epilogue ties into this alternate universe and is just a huge teaser for her next series, which is The Wicked Powers, which isn't gonna happen for years. So what I didn't really like about this was that there's so much that happens throughout the entire series that never gets resolved in the series itself, which is just all this buildup for another series after this. And I just found that so annoying because as a trilogy, it should stand by itself. Like the 3 books together should be something that feels complete. And because of the way that it's written, with all of this buildup, with all this information that never gets resolved in this series alone, and with this epilogue that is just teasing the next series, it felt really incomplete as a trilogy, and I didn't like that. I was really disappointed with the Dark Artifices series in a general sense. I was really hoping to like them. A lot of people liked the series, said it was the best that Cassandra Clare has ever written, and I just don't get it. Yeah, it's a huge unpopular opinion, but I didn't like it. The next book that I picked up was Hot Dog Girl by Jennifer Dugan. This is a contemporary novel. It follows a high school student named Eloise who works at the amusement park over the summer. She gets assigned as the dancing hot dog for the 2nd summer in a row. She has a huge crush on the diving pirate Nick, and she finds out that the amusement park is going to close down. So she is trying to get Nick to fall in love with her while also trying to save the park. I thought that this was a super fun and whimsical setting for a contemporary novel, and I was really excited to read it. Unfortunately, I didn't like this book. It's a theme of this video. I was really disappointed with it because there are just so many glaring problems with this book. I won't dive in too much about it, but essentially Eloise is really selfish. She only cares about herself. She ends up roping in her friend Celie, which I thought was so funny because whose name is Celie, and I was reading stuff about Unseelie and Seelie Court over there in the Dark Artifices. So I just thought it was funny because of that connection. But anyway, Eloise ropes her friend Celie into this grand fake dating scheme in order to get Nick to notice her. There are just a lot of issues with this plan. First of all, Nick already has a girlfriend. I really hate it in books when the character goes after somebody who's already in a relationship. It's just wrong, it's gross, I don't like it. And then also, Eloise is so convinced that Nick returns her feelings. She is very delusional about it. And she was like, his relationship with his girlfriend can't be good if I can lure him away from her. And I was just like, what? That doesn't make him a good person then? Like, I don't understand. It was just a huge mess. And then Eloise ropes her best friend into fake dating her in order to have Nick notice her or like to be jealous, which is so gross because she's dating another girl to get a guy to notice her. And I was just like, no. And they kind of address this in the book. She's like, well, if he was that type of guy, then I wouldn't want to date him anyway. And the thing is, like, if you had succeeded, how would you even know if he only wanted to be with you because you were with another girl and not because of anything else? Multiple times Celie is like, no, Eloise, you are insane. This isn't going to work. This is stupid. I don't want to be a part of this. But Eloise somehow convinces her. It's really obvious that Celie is in love with Eloise, and Eloise is just completely oblivious to this fact. Eloise is such a frustrating character that I really couldn't support her or really care for her. Celie deserves so much better than Eloise. Like, it's so annoying. Anyway, there's a lot of girl on girl hate as well between Eloise and Nick's girlfriend, who I forgot her name. The way that it's written in the book is that it's justified because they both mutually dislike each other while Nick's girlfriend is also cheating on him. So Eloise kind of had a right to be a bitch to her, I guess. But she didn't know that the girlfriend was cheating until later on in the book. And then that kind of like justifies her actions. It's just really annoying. I also really hate when the character is going after somebody who's in a relationship and that relationship is just unstable because the partner is cheating on them. And I'm just like, why does this constantly happen in books? It's just so annoying. Yeah, it was just a huge mess. And Eloise doesn't deserve that happy ending that she got, and it made me really mad. The next book that I read was Angel Mage by Garth Nix. Unfortunately, again, this book wasn't all that great. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, but it wasn't the best thing I read either. So Angel Mage basically takes place in this world where people can summon angels to do their bidding. It's a little difficult to explain, and I'm probably gonna do such a terrible job, but essentially the book is sort of a Three Musketeers retelling, but there are 4 musketeer type characters, and there's a 5th character, and she's sort of the villain of the book, but we get to see from her perspective. perspective, which I thought was really interesting. So her name is Lilith, and she is a very, very powerful angel mage, and she can summon very powerful angels without having to deal with the consequences. And the consequence of summoning angels is essentially you would age and die faster if you summoned angels. That's kind of the exchange for harnessing that power. Essentially, the book starts off with her waking up after, I think it's a century, and everybody thinks she's dead. No one really knows that she is alive. No one really knows the truth of what happened. And she sets out to find these 4 musketeer characters who each contain a bit of the angel perennial's spirit within them, I think. And essentially her plan is to gather these musketeers in the same place in order to do this ritual to bring Perennial back, because Perennial is her lover. It seemed really interesting to me, but the book is really slow. It's really dull. None of the characters seemed exciting to me. I didn't really like any of them. I don't remember any of their names, and that's how bad it is. The only reason I remembered Lilith and Perennial is because I just googled it and then didn't really care about all the other characters. There are 4 characters. We see from their perspectives of how they all end up in the same place, and they're trying to piece together why they feel like they know each other. They have this kind of connection upon meeting. Turns out it's because they kind of share that same angel spirit. And so at the end they're all like, oh my god, Lilith's alive, and tries to stop them, but really only one of them really does that. And it just didn't feel like a Three Musketeers story. Like, they didn't feel like a solid team or even friends, really. Like, their interactions are very boring. I feel like the character development could have been a lot better. I feel like the plot development could have been a lot more interesting, and the way that it was written really felt distant. Like, the way that it's written doesn't feel very close to the characters and their feelings and their thoughts, and so I felt like I couldn't really get to know them because there seemed to be this distance in terms of the voice and the writing, so I didn't enjoy that book as much as I had hoped. The next book that I picked up was Cursed by Thomas Wheeler and illustrated by Frank Miller. So you've probably heard of this book because it got developed into a Netflix series that was wildly popular. I had heard about this book before the series was announced. I was interested in reading it because I'm a huge fan of Arthurian legend, so I really love Arthurian legend adaptations and retellings, and I was really excited to read this book because the premise is really, really interesting. So if you don't know what it's about, Cursed is a book about Nimue. She is of fae kind, so she has powers, except she is cursed, hence the name, and the people in her village despise her. What happens is that there are these red paladins who are trying to eradicate the fae kind, so they're just mass murdering people. Nimue's village gets slaughtered, and she is the only one who survives. She sees her mom right before her mom dies, and her mom gives her this sword and is basically like, Nimue, you have to take this sword to Merlin, he'll know what to do. This kickstarts her whole adventure in this book. So Nimue is trying to take the Sword of Power, which is essentially Excalibur, but they never call it Excalibur in the book. They refer to it as many things. The Sword of Power as sort of the main one, and also the Devil's Tooth, among other things. And essentially she has to take this sword and find Merlin and give it to him. But along the way, she realizes that the sword has chosen her and that she doesn't need Merlin. She's going to be the savior of her kind. Really, really interesting. I love a book that focuses on a strong female character. I really liked how this was like an adaptation of The Lady of the Lake, because in most adaptations and in the legends, she doesn't really play that big of a role. I mean, what she does is really important. So in the legends, the Lady of the Lake is the one who gives Arthur Excalibur and also is the one who takes him to Avalon when he dies. So her character has always sort of just been contained as doing those two things. So I was really excited to see an adaptation focus on her character and her as something much more important in the grand scheme of things. So I didn't really have high expectations for this book. I had heard that it was bad, so I went into it thinking, okay, I don't have high expectations, it's going to be bad. It was worse than bad. I can't even tell you how much of a dumpster fire this book is. It's just so horrible. It just physically hurt me to read this book, honestly, and I wanted to give up so many times. Like, I could have DNF'd this book, but I didn't. I pulled through. I really wanted to know how it was gonna end, and I really wanted to read it so that I would watch the series and see how closely it follows the book. Y'all, this book has so many problems, and I'm planning to do a full review for this as sort of like a PSA, because no one should ever have to go through reading this book. Like, if you were curious enough to read it like I was, it's not worth it. It's just a complete waste of your time. Let's see, what are sort of the main things that I can tell you about this book? First of all, it's so poorly written. Thomas Wheeler is a screenwriter, so he's not a novelist, and you can really tell when you read this book that the person writing it was a screenwriter. You know, it's kind of ironic because I've actually read screenplays where the descriptions are more descriptive than the descriptions in this book. If you've read a screenplay before, then it's mostly dialogue with little sections that describe kind of what's happening, what's the emotion, what's the character feeling and stuff. And I read some really good descriptions in screenplays. This book is written in a way where it feels really stilted and awkward. The transitions especially are very awkward and kind of just random and don't really flow well together. And that really frustrated me as I was reading this book. Nimue as a character is so poorly written as well. She's supposed to be like this strong, independent character who finds power within herself to lead and save her people. Nimue is never really established as a character that I could sympathize with. It's kind of mentioned at the beginning that she's shunned by all of her people, like nobody accepts her, nobody really cares. You're supposed to feel sorry for her, but she makes a lot of dumb decisions. She doesn't listen to her best friend. And then essentially you get introduced to her having to take the Sword of Power to Merlin. She has a mission. She is somebody who's important now. But throughout that, she gets tempted by the power of the sword. She's like, the sword wants blood, and I'm going to just go kill off all these red paladins because that's how you solve things in this book. But really, she doesn't get established as somebody who is struggling with that temptation. She essentially just gives in immediately, and then she just kills people, and she doesn't really seem to care about that. Like, she doesn't really feel bad about murdering people. Those are mass murderers. So is it really wrong to kill them? But like, still, it's still murder. She like brutally murders these people, and it doesn't sit well with me. And like, this book is also unnecessarily like brutal and gory, and it doesn't need to be. And then essentially this book ends exactly where it began, with like a little epilogue afterwards. But at the beginning we get this teaser of Nimue like drowning and thinking, oh, this is all my fault. And literally it's like, pause, so you're probably wondering how I got here, and essentially just rewinds time, starts at the beginning, tells the story chronologically all the way through, and then ends with her drowning again. And I'm just like, that was dumb. That was a waste of time. And then the last thing I want to mention about this is that this is an Arthurian legend adaptation that tries to be clever but isn't really. The way that it's written with like the adaptations of the characters is just really annoying to me. Like, they were trying to reveal the names of these characters that are familiar to us in a way that was supposed to be like shocking, but isn't really. Like, to the reader, we recognize a name, so it's shocking to us, but within the book itself, it actually holds no meaning whatsoever. Like, none of the other characters actually recognize them or know each other, or like their relationship dynamics aren't like similar in any way, shape, or form. So it was really annoying that the writers were like, we are being smart here. We're being clever. We're gonna include this and it's gonna wow people because they recognize this name. And I'm just like, no, it's not clever. It hurts. This book hurts. Moving on, the last and final book that I read in August was Ghosts of the Shadow Market. This is a series of short stories that takes place in the Shadowhunters world. These short stories follows the character Jem, who was Jem Carstairs, then was Brother Zachariah, and then was Jem again. I really love Jem's character. I really enjoyed him in The Infernal Devices. These stories feel really inconsistent. I feel like some of them were just not that great. On the other hand, I really did enjoy reading more about his character, as well as some other characters that were introduced in here as well. This was my favorite book that I read in August because I actually enjoyed reading this. All the other books I read, I did not enjoy at all. So it's not saying too much about this book because several of the stories I did not enjoy, but I did thoroughly enjoy this book overall. I'm also super close to just getting to the end of reading all books in the Shadowhunter Chronicles that are out right now. So it's pretty dang crazy. Like, this is also a really great, I don't know, milestone in that journey. I really liked reading about the characters that are in Chain of Gold, which I'm not planning to read until the whole trilogy is out, but I was really interested in those characters in this book. Most of the Jem Tessa stuff was kind of like whatever. I'm not the biggest fan of the way that their story was written in here, but I still like them overall. Also, there were a couple stories at the end that was teasing the Wicked Powers series, so it was following some of the characters from Dark Artifices. I was really interested to kind of see the direction that Cassandra Clare was going to take that story. The last story in this book is what really ruined all of it for me. The last story in this book in particular, which was a reference to the end of Queen of Air and Darkness with the epilogue, I found to be really, really annoying. I was at first really excited for Wicked Powers because it was gonna follow Kit and Ty, and I was a lot more interested about what was happening with them. But then they introduced this character, Janus, and I can't with him, okay? I just can't. And obviously it's going to play a really big part in the Wicked Powers, and I'm just not into it. I'm not. So I'm really interested to see exactly what direction she's gonna take that story, but I'm already annoyed by it. Eventually I will get to reading the Wicked Powers when it comes out, and y'all can see my reactions to that. Those were all the books that I read in August, a total of 6 books. Let me know in the comments below what books you read in August and whether or not you read these books that I did and what your thoughts on them were. If you haven't seen my September TBR video, then I suggest that you watch it over here. And if you're not subscribed yet, then make sure you hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!